Because you basically have to ask yourself, would I like to be the most connected or the best connected? And it works. It's like comparing advertising to referrals, if you like. So 20 is fine. 200 is fine. 5,000, I'm not sure about that.
Welcome to the podcast about communication in business. I'm your host, George Torok. Did you know that I'm known as the speech coach for executives? Because I help business leaders deliver the intended message for greater success. And we do that through one-on-one coaching or group training for the team. On this podcast, you will hear advice and insights from communication experts from around the world. My guest today is Daniel Alfon. Here's 3 facts that I think you should know about Daniel. 1, he released his book about LinkedIn a decade after he signed up, and the book was published in 2014, so you do the math. 2, Daniel's superpowers include being a guest on the School of Podcasting, Podcasting Made Simple, and of course, Your Intended Message. This is a second appearance for him. And 3, he can ask questions and listen to the answers in English, Hebrew, and French. Bonjour, mon ami. Hello, Daniel. Welcome to Your Intended Message.
What an amazing intro, George. Thank you very much for having me.
Delighted to be talking with you. And today we're going to dive into the often mysterious world of LinkedIn. Daniel, LinkedIn, almost everybody in business has probably been told or believes that you gotta be on LinkedIn. If there's only one social media platform to be on, it's LinkedIn as far as business, as far as careers. Is that a fair statement to make?
Yes, it is, because the executives would enjoy Instagram or TikTok, but they would work on LinkedIn. Their paycheck would be ready, their credit card would be ready, and they would be in a professional mode.
And what have you found are some of the myths about LinkedIn?
The main myths I would mention is that our profile is less important than our company page. In fact, George, as you know, our individual profiles are way, way more important than the company page for most solopreneurs and entrepreneurs. Second myth is about the quantity of our connection, and it's less important than the quality of our network. A third I would mention is that instead of focusing on building your profile as a CV, you should build it as a website. You need to convert your ideal reader. And very quickly, advertising is less important than the content, and you don't have to pay LinkedIn, you have to invest time on the platform.
Quality versus quantity. What's the criteria for a quality connection?
Easy, you need to know all your connections. Let's imagine that I'm a podcast host and I'm interested in reaching out to John Doe, and I see that you, George Torok, is our mutual connection. So do I look at and wonder who's George? Or do I say, wow, this is the host of Your Intended Message, that's George. And if he's not riding his motorcycle now, maybe it would be an idea for me to reach out to him and ask him how he's been, and could he make the introduction?
So a real personal connection makes a good connection.
Yes, sir. And we have a limited bandwidth for that. Maybe yours is 10 as wide as mine, but we have a limit. We need to acknowledge there's a limit.
So a person who has 20,000 connections or followers, is that 20,000, is that wasted?
I wouldn't say it's wasted. It's much better than being in between. Because you basically have to ask yourself, would I like to be the most connected or the best connected? And it works. It's like comparing advertising to referrals, if you like. Advertising is based on a message. So if you have 20K or 30,000, then a few of them will refer or engage and go to your website and order maybe something. The worst position would be to increase the size of your network without reaching a critical mass. And that means you lose on both sides. you don't have enough exposure, while you dilute or pollute the quality of your network. So 20 is fine. 200 is fine. 5,000, I'm not sure about that.
Oh, that's interesting. Hmm.
Because what would happen is that you only gain marginal exposure, while you can no longer ask for that introduction. In the example which we just mentioned, I would see maybe 5 names of mutual connections, but I would look at them and wonder who they are. And if we're wondering who they are, so they basically wondering who are we. It won't work.
When someone reaches out to me to connect, how should I decide? Do I connect or what do I do?
Can I offer a third option?
Yes, please.
So let's imagine that you get X amount of incoming invitations. A few of them are people you know really well, so it's easy to accept. Some of them looks like spam, so you ignore them. But let's imagine you find someone interesting, a leader that could use your services as a speech coach. What you may want to do, George, is reply to that person without accepting his or her invitation. And you would basically say, thank you very much, Joe, for reaching out. I see that you're leading X Corp, and I noticed that you're doing A, B, and C. Could I be of help? Thank you very much, George Torok. If that person replies, and that leads into a meaningful conversation and doing business with him, excellent. If it doesn't, we basically move on.
Oh, so someone reaches out who could be a possible prospect for me. However, I play it a little bit cagey and say, okay, thanks for reaching out. I'm not ready to connect yet. Tell me a little bit more of how I might be able to help you.
Yeah, we could turn it in a more positive way, but basically, yes. That's what we would do. We would try to assess the quality of the lead. Has that person mentioned anything specific about you? Have they actually visited your profile? Let's start with that. Because if you don't see that they visited your profile, there are less chances of them actually working with you. This was a mass effort. They don't know who George Torok is. Or as if they say, hey, I noticed that you interviewed Joan Black, the queen of referrals, and I wonder if we could work together for my team about this aspect. This is a much stronger signal from my perspective.
So I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to pose it anyways. So I do receive requests to connect that just sends the standard message, and it almost screams, I want to connect. And my reaction to that is, I don't care what you want. Why should I connect? So I'm guessing that feature is something that we should all, the automatic, click without a message is we must avoid.
I think you're right. Let's revert to our intended message. Do I want to convey the message that I'm unprofessional? Or do I want to convey the message that I took a minimal effort to at least customize the message? Imagine I would bump into you in Toronto, and I would see you and I would approach you, and you'd say, hey, this is Daniel. And you would extend your hand. And instead of hearing me asking how you've been, George, I would say, excuse me, sir, where's the entrance to number 2 here? You would go blank, like I haven't recognized you. And this is humiliating. And that's the impression we might receive when we receive an invitation that says, I'd like you to join a professional network on LinkedIn, without acknowledging we even know that person. So please don't make that mistake.
Now, when I'm reaching out to people that I identify as possible prospects for me, I'm reaching out because we probably haven't met yet, but I want to reach out and make a connection. What should I say in my message when I'm reaching out to them? I certainly don't want to come off selling in the first message. What's a better way?
A better way may actually be to leave the LinkedIn invitation for the end of the process. In other words, if you know that the person is speaking in a tech conference and you're going to grab coffee with them, then after you had a one-on-one, that would be an ideal time for you to send that invitation. Or let's talk about the lost art of introductions. In many cases, George, you would see a mutual connection. Going back to our earlier question, if you know your network well, and that's the definition of a quality network, then you could ask someone to make the introduction. And when they make the introduction, your prospect will listen to them a lot more than they would listen to us. And then the invitation or the connection would come after they know who you are and not before they know who you are. You don't have, it's better to have a contract without a connection than a connection without a contract.
Mm. And I'm hearing, Daniel, that a lot of people are doing it backwards.
We've been doing LinkedIn wrong because LinkedIn forces us, or there are many mechanisms within LinkedIn that pushes us to do wrong metrics. Instead of asking ourselves, can I identify 20% of my revenues that I can trace back to LinkedIn activities? Or can I trace $100 to what I've done today, or $2,000 to what I've done last week? Instead of that, the metrics many leaders follow are actually vanity metrics. Instead of asking themselves about revenues, they ask themselves about followers. Instead of caring about demos and inquiries and orders, they cater to endorsements and discussions and followers and impressions and SSI, meaningless metrics. Let's get back to the basics. Our banking account is more important than the LinkedIn metrics. We're here to use LinkedIn and not the other way around.
So this LinkedIn becomes a drug.
If we are obsessed with what others think about us, and if we see that few people or no one has clicked or engaged or posted or reposted or commented, does that mean that our message has been conveyed, or has our intended message gone through in a nice way? We're not sure about that. So basically, we ask ourselves, why are we sharing? Because, George, LinkedIn is probably the only major platform where you can be successful without sharing anything. Think about it. You interviewed Pat Taggart about videos, corporate videos. So say I wanted to become a YouTube influencer. There's no way I could become a YouTube influencer without uploading videos to YouTube. If I want to become an Instagram star, there is no way for me to work or to succeed without uploading content. But on LinkedIn, the lost art of identifying your ideal prospect and leaving the LinkedIn platform and asking someone to make the introduction in the back office could result in more revenues than revenues you would gain because you shared twice a day X, Y, and Z on LinkedIn. Most of our network is not that keen and not that interested in seeing what we want to share. We don't have to do that.
Daniel, are you suggesting that we should not bother posting on LinkedIn?
If we enjoy posting and if we have high quality educational top of funnel content, then by all means, please do it. But if you rack your brains and you think you need to produce quality for the sake of LinkedIn, I'm not sure it's the right way to go. It's not worth the effort. If your website is where conversion happens. So repurposing content from your website makes a lot more sense. I can give also an example about podcast hosts, if you'd like.
Please do.
So let's compare the way you share an episode of your intended message with the way other hosts do. What other hosts do would basically say, it would go like, episode 20, I'm chatting with Jane Doe. You have to listen because of this and that. That is written from the host perspective. But you, George, are writing a thriller. You're asking a question and I want to know the answer to that question. And without giving me the answer, at the end of the post, you say, hey, and in the conversation with that person, we'll dive into A, B, and C. The second approach is much more interesting. It takes into account the perspective of the reader and the future listener. The first approach is me. Episode 20, episode 25. No one cares about the number of episodes. We care about the insights we may gain from listening to that episode of your intended message.
And good reminder, Daniel, of that when we market, we need to address the question in the mind of our audience, which is, what's in it for me? What can you do for me? I don't care what you do. What can you do for me?
I'd like to point our audience to a post you shared on LinkedIn recently. So what? And you take us through the exact process of the reader. So what? Why should I care? And just hearing that would make us, in some cases, abort and not share it, or rewrite it and make it more interesting. So it could be worthwhile to share less often, but to make people want to read your next piece of content instead of saying, oh, I know what that person is about, I'm not going to bother.
And Daniel, you reminded me of a phrase that I've heard repeated both in marketing, and it's a phrase I've repeated with my clients when I coach them on presentation, and that's, you need to enter the conversation in the mind of your audience.
I listened to the beginning of episode number 1 of your intended message, the very first episode with John Wilson. And the very first question you asked was about his experience. And the first tip he gave was to become a better listener. And it sounds like if you want to become a better speaker, then most people think about the way they present and how they, confidence, all sorts of things. But actually what he said and what you discussed with him is way, way more important. There's a conversation happening outside of us. And if we can understand that conversation and what happens before we enter the stage or the virtual stage, we have a much stronger chances of relating to that person and for them to want to listen to what we have to say and to our intended message.
And Daniel, you raise a fabulous point there. Too many people think it's about talking or putting out words. And that might be part of it. What's more relevant, is more critical, is the ability to listen to what the person is saying and not saying.
What you said about not saying is something that's counterintuitive, but it's very, very, very important. The objections we usually think about are people who don't agree with us. But people who listen, nod, and haven't been convinced are way, way more important for us, and we need to try to persuade them. It's like basically entering a field as a medic and seeing two people, and one of them, George, would be shouting because they're bleeding from their shoulder and they're really hurting. But the silent person over there may be about to lose conscience. And as a professional, you know that even though number one is really hurting and you can hear the screams, it's better for you to attend to the one that's silent, and not only the people who manifest their thinking and what they're not saying is way, way more important than what we acknowledge as speakers.
And we're too easily attracted by the one who makes the most noise, which we've got to learn to filter.
A simple tip I would quote from, I think, an earlier post you shared on LinkedIn. I used to end my presentations with Q&A. And I'm not the only one. I'm sure many listeners would typically end their session with Q&A. And what I understood after reading your post is that we don't control the Q&A. And the last question could be so dull that people would end the presentation, 90 minutes of thought-provoking experience. And because of the last 30 seconds, they would say, no, that wasn't that interesting. So yes, it's important to allow Q&A, but you would say, we're going to have Q&A and then I will conclude. And that enables you to cut and to have a strong points at the end. And even though some of our audience here have given hundreds or thousands of presentations, this is a counterintuitive tip that's typically easy to implement. I did it once, and I never end with Q&A anymore. And people are receiving more from the presentation, and their feedback is stronger. It's not that we're cutting Q&A, we're basically moving it a bit earlier. So thank you for that.
My pleasure, and so glad to hear that was so helpful. And that's a reminder of how we end our messages, how we leave the conversation. And of course, I'm guessing we want to leave the conversation, the exchange, with the next steps. What's the next step?
Right. Going back to LinkedIn post, if you like, educating people through LinkedIn post is ideal when you move them from point A to point B. And then you basically uncover the whole alphabet. And now they will say, George, please, we understand now there's a point C and D. We haven't been aware of that. How do we do that? And that would usually result in a one-on-one or something that you would work with them or their team to improve. And so make them eager to see what the next step is, hint about it, and make it interesting and make them want to hear more. Don't add to the conversation. Don't add to the presentation. Reduce the content and make them absorb and really understand what you've just said. Again, counterintuitive and again, very, very important.
And the short lesson there is that more information isn't always better right now. The right information and the relevance needs to be clear, which might lead to, I need more information.
Right. You're such an expert that it's tempting to want to squeeze and add another tip. But basically what we would do is overwhelm the person. So they would say, hey, George is very, very knowledgeable, but this is not for my league. And you want them to say, I can do that. Let's try and speak with George. And they would go the whole way because you've shown them that it's possible.
Daniel, that's a terrific phrase that I'm going to highlight there is you want your prospects, you want your clients to be able to say, I can do that. I can do that. And when they say that, when they think that, now you've got a relationship here that can be constructive, that can be productive for them.
There's a recent series on Netflix where Boris Johnson, the UK former prime minister, compares the style of leadership of Churchill and Hitler. And Hitler, what he said is basically, Hitler made you think he can do anything. And Churchill led you to think that you, George, can do anything.
What a difference that makes. Yes, all the difference. Daniel, one of the features that I'm curious about on LinkedIn is the services feature where you can list your services and then people searching for those services, you get a notice of that. How effective is that feature? And should we all be registering some services on LinkedIn?
I'm glad to report that none of my clients ever ordered services from LinkedIn, from the LinkedIn profile. It's simple to set up. It's free. But in most cases, people either would go to your website and would discover more about you, or in the LinkedIn platform, they would see that you and them share some mutual connections, and what they think about them would influence, your mutual connections would influence their decision to reach out to you. So when I visit your profile, I see that one of our mutual connections is Natasha Vasilevich. So if I ask Natasha, I heard listened to the episode where you interviewed Natasha, what Natasha would say would make me want to reach out to you regardless of you having the services page or not. So again, if you know your network, one person you know may be better than 20 who would say, who's that person again? Nah, I'm not sure I know him.
Daniel, how often should we be reaching out to people that we're connected to on LinkedIn for a coffee meeting, or if it's a distance, a Zoom call or a phone call, should that be part of our standard operating procedure?
I'm so glad you asked that, because that shows that you already understand the limits of our network. And in fact, that's a major challenge for most of us. So let's start with the easiest thing to do. If you consistently visit your notification page on LinkedIn, you would see two important milestones: birthdays and people starting a new position. So the birthday is very easy. Say you have 2,000 connections. So on average, 6 people a day would have their birthday or something like that. It's manageable. And the thing to do would be to, instead of sending them a meaningless happy birthday, because the 45th happy birthday is not that thrilling, I encourage you to actually visit their profile, see what they've recently shared, and then leave the LinkedIn platform and message them and ask how they've been. And that would take a whole new 40 seconds, at least. God forbid, maybe 50 seconds. So instead of accepting another invitation and saying, wow, I'm popular, ask yourself, when that person's birthday comes up, will I actually find the time to reach out to them, even though it would take one whole minute out of my busy day? And if you're not sure they're worth your time, then maybe it's not a good idea to connect, because we have a limited bandwidth.
And I'm hearing, and the message that keeps coming through to me is that LinkedIn is only one dimension of a relationship that should be on several dimensions.
Absolutely. We have our own ways. Some people would have a virtual coffee. Some people would take their motorbike and have lunch with that person. Others would try to define the VIPs, or the very important people you want to reach out to on a monthly, quarterly, or yearly basis, and don't make that number too big. It's better to keep in touch with 3 people and to have a meaningful conversations with them than to try and be, available to 200 people. At one point, you'll suffocate. You will not be able to do it. So what is the bandwidth that makes you comfortable, and to what bandwidth can you commit? Like for a whole year, can I reach out to one person a month? Excellent. George, can you do it like one person a week? Excellent. But will you be able to do it in 6 months' time when it's snowing, or 6 months' time when summer is up? And if you're not sure, then reduce that number and stick to something you can commit to in the long term.
Long term versus short term. LinkedIn is a long term plan?
Well, networking is a long term plan, and LinkedIn is just one card. It's an ace, but it's a card. So if you have another way to network with people, do it. Networking is more important than LinkedIn. LinkedIn starts where our networking ends, if you'd like.
LinkedIn's an ace in your networking hand. Daniel, for those who'd like to learn more about your services and perhaps sit down and have a one-to-one review of their LinkedIn profile and approach, they can reach out to you. They can find that link in the description below. Do you invite people to connect with you on LinkedIn?
The default setting now is follow, because going back to your earlier question, follow has all the advantages without any disadvantage. Because I started following people years ago, and that made sure that if I'm interested in seeing their content, I would see that content without them jeopardizing or lowering the quality of my network. And at the end of the process, I would connect with someone. If we had that meaningful relationship, I'll be glad to connect, but not as a starter. It will be the end of the process. As long as you have a process, you don't have to accept my process. Build some process.
Daniel, if you could sit down with a business leader and give them 1, 2, or 3 pieces of advice of how they might review their LinkedIn profile to see if it's time that it needs to be updated? What would be that advice or those questions?
Simplest way to do it would be to suggest that they have a conversation with someone who doesn't know them well and is willing to invest 10 minutes of their time. And I would ask that person to share their screen and to tell me their thoughts when they visit my profile without trying to be nice and without sugarcoating anything. And you would be amazed by the feedback you could hear. Because again, you know so much about your topic that in some cases you'll hear people say, oh, so it looks like you're doing X. And avoid the temptation of explaining. They're basically offering you a gift. That's what they understood. And if some people think you're offering X, and you're not offering X, then thank them and go back to the drawing board and make sure that you minimize the gap between what you'd like people to understand and what they understand. And if you could decide that every quarter you would have 15 minutes of a mini review, maybe adding one AI term to your search keywords, and maybe once a year, like an overall reading from A to Z, and seeing that you offer a new services or you pivoted, or you do so, rewrite it again to be aligned with your business objective.
Valuable advice from Daniel Alfon. My guest today, Daniel Alfon, reminding you that when it comes to LinkedIn, value quality over quantity. If you like what you heard, tell your friends and post your 5-star review on Apple Podcasts because that helps more listeners find us. Come back every week for more practical insights to help you deliver your intended message. I'm your host, George Torok.